Welcome to your weekend review here on WINN FM 98.9 for the period March 3rd through 8th. Making the news last week, St. Kitts and Nevis prioritizes battery storage for solar energy projects to stabilize grid. St. Kitts and Nevis responds to U.S. visa restrictions on Cuba medical missions. Questions mount concerning recent scandal brought forth by St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister over ECCB governor's residence. St. Kitts and Nevis foresee economic repercussions from U.S. trade wars.
The People's Action Movement calls for an independent investigation into East Coast housing development scheme.
Trade wars escalate inflation concerns in St. Kitts and Nevis and the Caribbean region.
St. Kitts Nevis national security officials emphasize that youth voice is critical to shaping policies to address delinquent behaviors. CRFM delegation pleased with the efforts made to enhance St. Kitts and Nevis's marine sector. Natasha Gray Brooks highlights neglect in constituency number 1 East Bastille.
Now the details. During the Prime Minister's press conference on March 6th, the Honorable Conris Maynard, Minister of Public Infrastructure, Energy and Utilities, Domestic Transport, Information, Communication and Technology and Posts, addressed solar energy advancements in St. Kitts and Nevis, emphasizing the importance of integrating battery energy storage into all new solar projects. Maynard highlighted the critical role of battery energy storage in maintaining grid stability.
All solar energy projects that we're pursuing with potential developers will have an aspect of battery energy storage.
This decision stems from lessons learned in other Caribbean nations where the rapid adoption of solar panels without adequate battery storage led to grid instability. Maynard explained that due to the island's small size and concentrated solar farms,
a single cloud cover like today can mean that a farm that is producing 20 megawatts of power this minute can produce literally 2 megawatts of power the next minute.
This rapid drop-off in solar power can destabilize the grid. Therefore, battery energy storage is essential to regulate the decrease and allow for a smooth transition to traditional energy sources.
Second reason for battery storage, of course, is to extend the amount of power you can give to the grid over a period of time.
While solar energy is most effective from approximately 8 a.m. to 4 or 5 p.m., batteries can extend this time frame.
Naturally, you can have batteries that extend power right into the night, but then it becomes economically unfeasible.
Thus, a careful analysis is being conducted to determine the optimal balance between solar and battery capacity to ensure cost effectiveness.
That analysis is being done to ensure that any developer that we bring on is properly guided as to how much solar and how much battery.
Maynard emphasized that the need for stabilization extends to other renewable sources as well, including wind.
That even includes wind as well. Persons think sometimes that wind is consistent.
While wind energy is generally reliable, fluctuations can still occur, as demonstrated by a recent period of unusually high winds followed by a period of stillness.
I would want to remind you, recently we had an uptick in wind. I don't know if you remember, we had about 3-4 weeks where the wind was incredibly high. And today is particularly very still.
Although not on the same scale as solar fluctuations, these variations necessitate a stabilizing element to maintain grid integrity.
This similar thing, not on the same scale, but you need to have some stabilizing element to ensure that the power being put onto a grid that is so small.
He highlighted the vulnerability of St. Kitts and Nevis's grid, which is approximately 30 megawatts, stating that a 15 megawatt plant experiencing inconsistencies could destabilize the system.
If you simply have a 15 megawatt plant of any size and that cannot operate consistently, it destabilizes the entire grid, compared to if your grid was 100 megawatts and you had that same 15 megawatts that goes offline.
Therefore, all renewable energy projects will incorporate varying levels of energy components to ensure stability and extend the availability of renewable energy.
So all of them will have some energy component in varying levels to ensure stability and the ability to extend the renewable energy that's available to us.
Despite its many advantages, solar energy still has drawbacks, such as high upfront costs for households. Installing solar panels can be expensive, but the cost has decreased by 62%, and a typical home installation rarely exceeds $20,000. Solar energy is also weather dependent and not equally efficient around the world. Solar power plants also require space, about 32 acres of land, to power 1,000 homes, and can potentially harm the environment with hazardous materials needed to build solar infrastructure. However, the advantages are evident. Solar energy is an immensely abundant renewable energy source. Solar technologies are also becoming more efficient, and the panels are becoming cheaper. Also, the solar life cycle generates minimal greenhouse gas emissions. During a press conference on March 6, 2025, the Right Honorable Dr. Denzel Llewellyn Douglas, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Trade, Industry and Commerce, Consumer Affairs, Economic Development and Investment, addressed the United States' recent visa restrictions targeting Cuba's overseas medical mission program. The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced an expansion of the policy, which now includes foreign government officials and their families from countries participating in these programs. The decision has sparked significant concern across the Caribbean region. Dr. Douglas characterized the issue as one of grave importance, emphasizing that St. Kitts and Nevis, along with its regional partners, has approached it with the utmost seriousness.
This is a matter that we have taken very, very seriously as a government and also as a region.
He also highlighted that Caribbean foreign ministers recently convened to discuss the implications of the U.S. policy, underscoring a collective effort to evaluate existing agreements with the Cuban government.
On examination, we would want to make sure that the agreements do not in any way support what the U.S. is accusing, that these persons are really being dehumanized because they are working hard in our countries, according to the U.S. in perception, and they're not being adequately paid because the money is being paid to the Cuban government in order to sustain the status quo in Cuba. We, again, in St. Kitts and Nevis, want to make it very clear to the world that we are not part and parcel of this type of practice as has been accused.
Specifically, these evaluations aim to ensure that bilateral arrangements on medical personnel comply with international norms and human rights guidelines amidst U.S. accusations of forced labor. The U.S. alleges that Cuban overseas medical missions serve as a vehicle for exploitative and coercive labor practices that disproportionately benefit the Cuban government at the expense of individual workers. Secretary of State Marco Rubio emphasized that the U.S.'s stance targets not only the Cuban regime but also extends accountability to foreign governments allegedly complicit in such practices. Quote, Cuba continues to profit from the forced labor of its workers, and the regime's abusive and coercive labor practices are well documented. The United States is committed to countering forced labor practices around the globe. To do so, we must promote accountability not just for Cuban officials responsible for these policies, but also those complicit in the exploitation and forced labor of Cuban workers, Rubio stated in his announcement. Dr. Douglas sought to assure global partners that St. Kitts and Nevis remains committed to upholding human rights and ethical employment practices. Referencing Cuban personnel employed within the Federation, he clarified,
We understand that there are some of the doctors who are here with us from Cuba who have direct employment relationship with the government of St. Kitts and Nevis without the input of the government of Cuba.
He added that while 11 professionals are here under agreements involving the Cuban government, steps would be taken to ensure their human rights are respected. Dr. Douglas further highlighted future engagements with U.S. State Department officials in Washington, D.C., and consul generals in Miami to address these emerging concerns, demonstrating the active effort to resolve potential disputes amicably. The visa restrictions announced by the United States present far-reaching implications, extending beyond limitations on individual travelers to also encompass government officials. This expansion has heightened apprehension across the Caribbean as it threatens to strain diplomatic relations between the U.S. and countries benefiting from Cuban medical missions. In St. Kitts and Nevis, Cuban doctors and medical personnel play a critical role in supporting the local healthcare system, a reality mirrored in many other small island states in the region. In the wake of these developments, the Caribbean community appears unified and is pressing for a measured approach to resolving this issue. Dr. Douglas underscored the region's collective stance.
This is a very serious matter because you're not talking only about restricting visa to the ordinary traveler, but to government officials as well. And so the entire Caribbean community is highly concerned about this matter, and we are treating it with the highest regard, at the highest level, so that we will be able to arrive at a solution to this emerging issue.
As discussions between Caribbean nations and U.S. officials proceed, attention remains focused on achieving a balanced resolution that respects sovereignty while addressing human rights concerns. Amidst growing concerns over economic challenges in the Eastern Caribbean, St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves has voiced strong criticism against the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, ECCB, for spending $22 million on an official residence for its governor, labeling the expenditure a scandal. Gonsalves expressed his strong outrage over the ECCB's decision to allocate such a substantial amount for the governor's residence in a strongly worded letter. During the March 6, 2025 Prime Minister's press conference, Prime Minister Drew announced that this matter is outside the purview of the St. Kitts and Nevis government.
So let me say, this does not come under the purview of the St. Kitts Nevis federal government. It's an entity that involves all of these governments. So I just want to put that out. With respect to what you speak about, with respect to the residents, let me say first of all that the central bank, the Monetary Council, has a chairperson. The initial chairperson, Webster, as you know, it has now been passed on to another country, I think is Antigua at this particular time, because we rotate. And the chairperson for the Monetary Council would, speak to issues during their cycle when those issues come up. And so any decisions made is made collectively with all the countries involved, and not just one country having a say with respect. As we know, this is an ongoing discussion in the public. I can say that all information with respect to this is being sought, and I think that the central bank, in its prudence, will make sure that the information is collected and properly presented to the people of the region.
Gonsalves, regarding the nearly completed 10,000 square foot residence, argues that the governor's, quote, lavish spending is both irresponsible and out of touch with the economic struggles faced by the people of the region, including rising food prices and increasing poverty, end quote. He emphasized that, quote, such opulence is unacceptable, particularly during a time of economic hardship in St. Kitts and Nevis and across the region, end quote. Since the letter began circulating on social media, Governor Antoine remained silent. The bank has stated that it has no comment at this time. The situation has stirred discontent across much of the ECCU. The developments are ongoing, and further information will be provided as it becomes available. The Right Honorable Dr. Denzel Llewellyn Douglas, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Trade, Industry and Commerce, Consumer Affairs, Economic Development and Investment, has articulated concerns regarding the potential adverse effects of ongoing trade wars initiated by the United States on the economy of St. Kitts and Nevis. Speaking at the Prime Minister's press conference with the Cabinet Ministers on March 6th, Dr. Douglas addressed the implications of these trade conflicts involving key U.S. allies and economic powers, including Canada, Mexico, and China. Dr. Douglas highlighted the historical context of preferential trade agreements between the U.S. and the Caribbean, particularly the Caribbean Basin Initiative established during the Reagan administration.
Over the years, we have been the beneficiary of good trading relationship between the United States of America and the Caribbean, St. Kitts and Nevis included, of course. Remember the Caribbean Basin Initiative, which was established since in the early days of Reagan and other presidents of that nature, and gave us favorable trading conditions with the United States.
He explained that this initiative previously allowed tariff-free entry of goods manufactured in St. Kitts and Nevis into the U.S. market, benefiting the local manufacturing sector. The minister cautioned that the current trade landscape significantly departs from this advantageous past.
That has changed dramatically over the years. And so the effect on St. Kitts and Nevis really will be the effect as a result of the fallout from countries which would have traded with the United States and who in turn we buy goods from.
The trade minister elaborated on the indirect impact, emphasizing the resilience on ports like Miami, St. Thomas, and New York to import goods. With the U.S. imposing increased tariffs, Dr. Douglas anticipates higher prices.
It is expected for us to pay higher prices for the goods that would have been imported through any port or from ports of origin where increased tariffs would have been placed by the announcements made by the President Trump, within 100 days of taking office for a second time in the history of the United States.
Dr. Douglas further pointed out the compounded challenges arising from the COVID-19 pandemic, which has disrupted global supply chains.
Not only will this impact us because of the increase in tariffs, but we have already been impacted because of COVID, where it takes much longer for goods to arrive to our ports, much longer because there has been disruption in the supply trade routes as a result of shortages from COVID. And now we are going to experience, I would think, maybe longer periods for goods to arrive.
These delays, coupled with increased tariffs, are expected to inflate the cost of goods, ultimately affecting the cost of living for citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis.
The cost of these goods would go up, and then, of course, it will impact negatively on the cost of living for our people here in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Despite these concerns, Dr. Douglas acknowledged the global response to the U.S. trade policies, citing Canada's pushback as an example.
The good thing about it is that the entire world is responding to what has been announced by the President of the United States in terms of increased tariffs. We have seen, for example, the pushback from countries like Canada. In fact, as a result, I believe, of Canada's reaction, we've heard only a few nights ago that he has suspended the application of the tariff against, increased tariff against Canadian goods by a month. And maybe that could be extended further because the Canadian government has indicated that its citizens will not be the ones to suffer, but the Americans themselves will suffer. And so that's the way it is.
Regarding the local economy, Dr. Douglas mentioned the electronic assembling parts sector, stating,
"Of course, we still have the electronic assembling parts with a few of the companies that are manufacturing goods that go into the U.S. market. And we are still waiting to see how those tariffs will impact positively or negatively on the cost of goods, depending on what side of the equation you're sitting.
The government is closely monitoring the situation to assess the full impact on the nation's trade and economy.
The federal government's plans to build 2,400 smart homes during its tenure continue to breed concerns in St. Kitts and Nevis. The East Coast Housing Development Housing Scheme was expected to address the country's housing shortage and create jobs, but the $1.52 billion Trinidadian dollars project seems not to be going as initially planned. At a press conference of the ministers of the St. Kitts and Nevis government, Housing Minister Jeffrey Hanley attributed the delay in the construction of homes to challenges on the part of the investor.
As you know, as a country, we engage the East Coast Housing Development in assisting us in delivering some homes. Unfortunately, the 600 homes that we were anticipating, with all of the challenges that we might have been experiencing, not us so much as a government, but the investor. That has caused some delays. These matters are being worked on. And what I said to the Federation is that based on the contractual arrangement that we would have signed, the AG office, of course, is working on ensuring that the government's interest, which it is protected.
The East Coast Housing Project was presented as an ambitious housing program consisting of newly constructed climate-smart homes with basic appliances inside. But according to Henley, about 140 homes were constructed through the National Housing Corporation. Critics raised the concerns that the first 600 homes, which were to be delivered within 2 years, had not been achieved. But Hanley declared that despite the delay, the government did not lose any money.
We have not lost any money as a government, but we are committed in continuing with our home delivery. There are many investors are sending in proposals, and we are going through these proposals. The new method, the technology that was introduced, it took a longer time in terms of buy-in, but we are working on all of those. So that's where we are right now with the East Coast in particular.
From the outset, the opposition was fierce about the East Coast Housing Development's involvement in the housing program, as opposers consistently regarded the arrangements as a shady deal between the government of St. Kitts and Nevis and the Trinidadian company East Coast Housing Development. The People's Action Movement, in particular, has accused the government of entering into a secret agreement with East Coast Housing and cited concerns about due diligence. Having been updated on the housing scheme and the investors' report of challenges, the opposition party has called for an independent investigation. Quote, "This administration continues to showcase its inexperience and disregard for sound decision-making. It is now imperative that an independent investigation be launched to scrutinize the processes leading to the awarding of this contract. The people of St. Kitts and Nevis deserve answers, and those responsible for any mismanagement or reckless decision-making must be held accountable. Failure to address this matter will only erode public trust further, reinforcing the growing perception that this government prioritizes expedience over competence and secrecy over accountability." Unquote. Despite the delay in the construction of the smart homes, Minister Hanley made it clear that the country's housing program is not devoid of success. He said the government has made a commitment to deliver housing solutions, and the National Housing Corporation will continue with that mandate.
As global trade wars intensify, particularly among the United States and Canada, Mexico, and China, their impact on international pricing structures has prompted concerns regarding inflation in dollar-pegged economies like St. Kitts and Nevis. The inflationary ripple effect has raised questions regarding consumer and business costs and the economic resilience of small import-dependent islands. Dr. Terence Martin, Associate Professor and Director at Winston-Salem State University and host of WINN FM's Money Matters, addressed these concerns in a recent interview. According to Dr. Martin, the Federation is experiencing contrasting inflationary trends.
If we are to look at inflation specifically, inflation has been trending downward, and it would also be downward in St. Kitts and Nevis because our currency is pegged to the US dollar.
Dr. Martin stated, however, he warned of potential short to medium-term implications.
We expect increased import costs from U.S. distributors who would likely raise prices of goods in the Federation, particularly consumer electronics, appliances, vehicles, construction materials. If local businesses pass on higher costs to consumers, the Federation could see inflationary pressure rise in the medium term.
On the flip side, he suggested that a surplus of agricultural goods in U.S. markets could stabilize or lower food prices in the region.
If we were to consider that if the U.S. were to flood the Caribbean markets with surplus agricultural products due to lost exports to Mexico, Canada, China, food price inflation might remain stable or even decline. So you have both sides of the coin, right? Where inflation could either go up or down depending on really what tends to happen.
The discussion of regional inflation dynamics continued on the March 5th, 2025 episode of ECCB Connects, a program by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, ECCB. Director Shermalan Kirby from the Corporate Relations Department highlighted the importance of public understanding about inflation, deflation, and disinflation. Economist Kevin Woods from ECCB's Research, Statistics, and Data Analytics Department explained that price trends largely influence inflation rates in imported goods in major trading partners.
We are small, open economies that rely heavily on imports. So, to a great extent, the inflationary pressures that we face are generally imported from our major trading partners.
Emphasizing how inflationary pressures from the US and other developed markets transfer directly to local economies. Fortunately, Woods explained, the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union ECCU typically enjoys favorable rates of inflation compared to higher rates in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Barbados. Regional governments, however, have not been passive. According to Woods, efforts to cushion the impact of inflation have included social transfers to vulnerable populations via vouchers, direct cash assistance, and subsidies on staple goods.
Sometimes it is in giving them a voucher that they could purchase certain goods. Sometimes it's an electronic transfer to their bank accounts in order to help them to do that. What governments have also done as well, apart from the social transfers, is that they have set prices on basic items which should go no higher. You could think of things like sugar, corn, some of rice, some of these staples, so that the poor and vulnerable don't have to face a rapid escalation in the prices of these necessary things.
These interventions aim to mitigate the elevated cost of living, especially for items deemed necessary for everyday life, while fostering economic stability for lower-income households. Nonetheless, the distinction between inflation, disinflation, and deflation remain crucial for public understanding. As Woods explained, disinflation, the slowing rate of price increases, does not translate into falling prices, deflation. If the price for milk is now $7, with the decrease in inflation, it would not go to $6 or $5.
No, because it is still inflation. However, if you have a scenario where you have deflation, that's different. So with deflation, prices actually fall. So a gallon of milk will be cheaper in, say, 2025 compared to 2024. Okay? But that usually is not a phenomenon or an event that takes place for an extended period of time. Because if it does, that also has some detrimental impacts on the economy. And the reason I say that is, while the thought of deflation is good to a consumer, we'd like to hear that prices are falling. But the problem with that is that when prices are falling, people delay consumption, anticipating that the price will be lower in the future. And so what happens is that economic activity almost grinds to a halt, because people say, well, I know the price is going to fall, so I am going to wait until later to buy it. And that cycle continues, and it is very difficult to get out of a cycle where prices are falling.
While lower inflation may offer businesses more predictability, inconsistent or volatile inflation rates could disrupt economic activity, particularly for small enterprises already burdened by rising operational costs. Inflation is expected to stabilize or moderate further as global central banks adjust interest rate policies. However, Woods cautioned that this depends heavily on shifting dynamics in the US and global markets.
While the general consensus is that interest rates will moderate and go lower, we will have to see what recent developments result in terms of their inflationary impact.
With the Federation's economy closely tied to international trends, individuals and businesses alike must remain proactive, adapting to the opportunities and challenges arising from volatile global economic conditions. The effects of trade wars, fluctuating inflation rates, and pragmatic policy measures underscore the complex web of influences on the everyday economic realities of St. Kitts and Nevis. While government interventions and favorable monetary policies may provide some stability, the interconnected nature of global markets necessitates vigilant monitoring and informed decision-making both at institutional and individual levels.
Eartha Carey, coordinator of the Citizen Security Secretariat, said the findings of the 90-day campaign highlighted the importance of the youth voice in decision-making. According to Carey, the youth played a fundamental role in the 90-day campaign as they brought critical issues to the fore that were overlooked by authorities for years.
Some of the things that were overlooked is that, and these came from the voices of the communities, including the youths. Let's not leave them out, including the youths. We had an engagement in one community, and some of the youths were saying that they know that there are issues that are in their household, and the parents did not know or do not want to take the approach to do stuff like counseling, right? So when we look at
counseling for the children
parents,
or the parents themselves,
yes,
okay.
the parents, and when that was mentioned by a youth, I mean, we had to really take a step back and be like, okay, wow. So the children, for us, the team, it told us that the children are definitely paying attention to what's going on, and that is why, with the findings also, some of them revealed that's one of the reasons why they also turn to the gangs, so to speak. They turn to the gangs for support, they turn to the gangs for aid, they turn to the gangs to render support or safety, as they may put it, because they felt safe with the gang peers, so to speak.
Sergeant Charmaine Ordain, head of the National Intervention Team, shared the sentiment of the host of In Focus, Ian Richards, that today's youth are more inclined to express themselves and are more alert about troubling matters within their households.
Just this week I had that similar impact where I had a meeting up Monday, a very long meeting at a high school, and one of the youths waited on the outside for me, and he expressed himself respectfully and identified that the family needs help because this is why he's going towards certain behavior in school. And I felt good to see that, this young man, a teen, I think he was about 15 years old, can reach out to the police and say, I've identified my family needs help.
Drug use, poverty, social media influence, and lack of religious upbringing were identified as some key factors driving delinquent behaviors. According to Ordain, children as young as 10 are smoking marijuana, and some teens are also engaging in vaping.
And there has been an increase over the past 2 to 3 years when it comes to involvement of youths with drug abuse.
What age are we looking at?
We're looking as young as 10 years old. The small amount between 10 to 12 is a small amount, but from 12 in the high school age group, it's ridiculous. And you often wonder why this is happening, why they're geared towards, and we have to look at vaping as well. Just last week or week before, I was passing a particular area, and one young man actually had 2 vapors in his mouth, in his uniform. And it is alarming when it comes to the drug abuse among our youths. And this is one thing that we have to try to see how best we can diffuse as soon as possible.
Ms. Carey said authorities and the schools through the Ministry of Education will utilize some existing resources and programs to combat the delinquencies within the communities. Representatives of the Belize-based organization Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism, CRFM, visited the Federation to promote the OECS Biospace project funded by the European Union. The delegation consisted of Mr. Peter A. Murray and Ms. June Masters. Following their visit to St. Kitts, the 2 officials traveled to Nevis on February 27, where they were engaged in discussions with officials from the Department of Marine Resources, the Department of Physical Planning and Environment, and the Marine Resources Minister, and also visited various fish landing sites across the island. The discussion points included enhancing data collection and standardizing the operations at fish landing sites as part of their quest to enhance coastal management. Mr. Peter Murray explained.
We are hoping that we can look at how we can enhance coastal management in the Federation, especially in terms of the fisheries sector. One of the things we found is that there's a need to be able to determine whether we're doing things right and how we're doing things, how we can improve. So among the things we're looking at is the collection of data that can support sustainable management of the resources. We're also looking at other factors that deal with management measures and that sort of thing, in the hope that coming out of the work of the OECS Biospace project, we can support the increased, improved management of the living marine resources of the Federation, which will redound, of course, to the benefit of the population, both economically and in terms of food security.
Murray, speaking on behalf of his counterpart, expressed content with the work being done within the Federation's fisheries sector. He confirmed the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism's continued support to the marine sector in the Federation.
I think St. Kitts and Nevis can be a beacon in terms of what is happening here. There are things that we found that is being done right. And so we think that, if we can provide any support to assist with that, we're willing to do that. I quite honestly, I think St. Kitts and Nevis is doing so well that we're helping with tweaking. We're not really doing anything new. We're just helping with tweaking what's already been done so well. I'll say on my behalf, I say kudos to what has been going on in the Federation, most definitely. But we are here, and it's been a pleasure.
The delegation's visit to the Federation follows the 14th special meeting of the Ministerial Council of the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism held in St. Vincent and the Grenadines from October 7 to 11, 2024. The ministers committed to improving climate-smart blue economic growth from the marine resources and addressing the state of fisheries and aquaculture in the Caribbean by expanding production across the 17 member states to improve food security and jobs. Nevis's Fisheries Minister Eric Evelyn said that progress has been made within the island's fisheries sector, particularly in biodiversity management and sustainable practices. Evelyn emphasized his commitment to working with regional partners for the further advancement of the island's marine sector.
Of course, we know that we are very big here on food security and food sovereignty, and a part of that is what we do in the fisheries subsector. We have been very active in the fisheries subsector. We have been doing a lot of things in terms of biodiversity management, in terms of sustainability as well. And so we are happy that any assistance we can get from the CRFM, from the European Union, and any other overseas organizations, we are always delighted to accept that assistance. And so whatever this project will be offering to us in terms of sustainable coastal management, in terms of our resilience to climate change, what we're doing with our fisheries, what we're doing with our lobster and our conch, we certainly welcome that.
Minister Evelyn showered praises upon the fishermen and officials working in the marine sector for their efforts in improving resilience and productivity. The leader of the People's Action Movement and the party's representative for Constituency Number 1, Natasha Shani Gray Brooks, has repeatedly expressed her displeasure with the lack of attention being given to East Bastille. Gray Brooks, in an open message to Parliamentary Representative for Constituency 1 East Bastille, Dr. Jeffrey Hanley, highlighted some issues plaguing the area and called out the area representative for neglecting the concerns of constituents. Quote, representation isn't about ignoring your constituents. It's not a performance, a photo op. It's not about dressing up in matching colors and looking good or a pat on the back for simply occupying a seat. It's about accountability, responsiveness, and a relentless dedication to the needs of the people you swore to serve. Let's be clear. Disappearing acts, closed-door decisions, and selective listening are not representation. They are acts of betrayal. They are a slap in the face to the very individuals who entrusted you with their voices, said Gray Brooks to Hanley. One of the major issues talked about is the road infrastructure in East Bastille, particularly the deterioration of Southwell Drive, which leads to the Tucker Clark Primary School, the Newtown Health Center and Dental Unit, and the Newtown Community Center. WINN FM visited the area and recognized that the road is rugged and in need of a facelift. It has become unbearable for some commuters who ply the stretch daily. On rainy days, the potholes are even more evident as countless pools of water span a wide portion of the street.
It is very sad that I have to come to Southwell Drive. Come to Southwell Drive to speak on an issue that I spoke about last year. You mean to say that we had visitors to this country? You mean to say that a new school year has opened and Dr. Jeffrey Hanley, who is the representative for this constituency, continues to neglect not just the people of Ponds Pasture, the whole of East Bastille, but he continues to neglect all the pedestrians that use Southwell Drive. If Dr. Hanley was to walk a mile in the shoes of the students that go to Tucker Clark Primary, in the shoes of the teachers that teach Tucker Clark Primary, in the shoes of the residents of Pans Pasture, in the shoes of the different people that come to the gym here in Pans Pasture, in the shoes of the nurses that work at the Newtown Health Centre, in the shoes of the patients that visit the Newtown Health Centre, in the shoes of the mothers who take their children to clinic, he would understand that this is an area that he has neglected.
The PAM leader shared road safety concerns, fearing what could happen if the roads are not repaired. She also warned Hanley that if he continues to ignore the people's concerns, he will be removed from Parliament.
You know, we have had so many accidents over the past months, and sometimes the road is the cause of those accidents. Imagine the drivers will have to drive on these roads and suppose their tires go out and run into one of our children. You know what a catastrophe that would be? Dr. Jeffrey Hanley, you have failed the people, not just of Pons Pasture, but of East Bastille. You have failed the people who walk on the street daily. You have failed the policemen who use this training complex. You have failed the people who have used this road continuously, and the cries are falling on deaf ear. The cries are falling on deaf ear, and we need you to leave this constituency, because clearly, if you were paying attention to this constituency, these roads would not be like this. Imagine people have to be walking and trying not to fall as a result of the state of disrepair in this road. And you have seen these comments. People have brought this to your attention, and you continue to ignore the people. Continue to ignore the people, Dr. Jeffrey Hanley, because it will just take you right out of Parliament and back to what you used to do.
Gray Brooks additionally raised concerns about the sporting facilities in the area, showing pictures and videos of the tennis court in a state of ruin. A member of the Tennis Association told WINN FM that efforts had been made to resurface the tennis court, but there had been a challenge to allocate funding from the Ministry of Sports. Quote, "We are not getting enough money from them to resurface that court," the tennis representative said. Gray Brooks expressed that the constituents of East Bastille are fed up with the neglect and fed up with the state of disrepair of the community. Quote, "True representation is a dialogue, a partnership, a sacred covenant. It demands empathy, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to the common good. It requires listening, learning, and acting with courage and conviction. So let me be clear. The people say you are not listening. East Bastille residents say you are not acting in their best interests, and we recognize you are not representing the true needs of your constituents. Then clearly you are not doing your job, and the people deserve better," said Gray Brooks to Hanley. After a couple of years of the Development Bank of St. Kitts and Nevis' saga, there is a call by the International Monetary Fund for the bank to undergo reform. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, identified key deficits within the operations of the Development Bank of St. Kitts and Nevis, and it believes that reforms can help to accelerate financial strength and facilitate banking access, particularly for the most vulnerable people in society. According to the preliminary findings of the IMF staff at the end of its official 2025 mission to St. Kitts and Nevis, non-performing loans at Development Bank has posed great challenges for the financial institution and also liability to the government of St. Kitts and Nevis. Quote, "The bank is facing significant challenges due to high non-performing loans and weak profits. Although the bank does not take deposits, it has borrowed from the public and the banking sector and poses a contingent liability to the government. The government and the new management are actively working to address the bank's accountability and financial performance," unquote. The IMF confirmed that the Development Bank is conducting an external audit, which according to the report had not been conducted since 2018. Quote, the priority is to thoroughly analyze the bank's financial situation, including its non-performing loans and loss-making loan programs, reassess its financial and social functions, potentially achievable through private lending and targeted social support, and chart the optimal path forward, firmly based on the bank's viability and fiscal prudence. The legal framework around the bank should be revised to significantly strengthen its regulation and supervision, said the IMF report. The IMF mission also sees gaps within the extended banking sector, citing the need for financial soundness to be strengthened at the private banks and credit unions in St. Kitts and Nevis. Quote, banks should continue their efforts to reduce non-performing loans and to meet the prudential requirements for provisions and capital based on their plans submitted to the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, unquote. Financial education is crucial for economic growth and poverty reduction. Therefore, it was recommended that banks and credit unions improve their financial education campaigns so that customers and clients are fully aware of the standards and requirements. Quote, the bank's efforts to improve the financial education of their potential clients are welcome and should be potentially joined with public resources. This is especially important amid the rapid credit growth and the Regional Credit Bureau becoming more operational. In addition, the regulation and oversight of credit unions by the Financial Services Regulatory Commission has room for improvement, particularly in the areas of lending standards, provisioning requirements, and supervisory actions. Efforts to enhance the effectiveness of the anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism framework should continue, unquote. Meanwhile, it may take several years to remedy the institutional problems at the Development Bank of St. Kitts and Nevis. A merger of short-term and long-term policies and initiatives on the part of the bank's leadership and the government could help to restore the institution to financial stability.
You are listening to the Week in Review here on WINN FM 98.9. Thank you for listening and have a productive week.